Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Lee. I'm the director of UBC's Asian, Canadian, and Asian Migration Studies program, as well as the interim co-chair of the Asian Canadian Community Engagement Initiative here at UBC. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for a celebration of a century of Asian communities at UBC. This event is being supported by the UBC Centennial Fund, and if you're using social media today, please consider using our hashtag ACAM100. So for those of you who are just joining us, earlier this afternoon, Elder Larry Grant gave us a welcome on behalf of the Musqueam people and kicked off our celebration of this year's ACAM graduates. As part of UBC's Centennial, we are looking back today at a century of ties between UBC and Asian Canadian communities. And we're also looking forward to the future as our graduates go into the world ready to make a difference. And we are especially honored to have two very special guests with us today, Dr. Robert Lee and Ms. Carol Lee, who will participate in an intergenerational conversation with our students. In 2012, UBC recognized 76 Japanese Canadian students who were unjustly removed in 1942 at the outbreak of the Second World War. As part of its tribute to the students of 1942, Dean Gage Averill of the Faculty of Arts announced the creation of an academic program to ensure that histories of anti-Asian racism will not be forgotten. Today, ACAM is 2 years old, and we are building a thriving program committed to community-based learning. Dean Averill also established the Asian Canadian Community Engagement Initiative to advance UBC's ties with local Asian Canadian communities. These and other actions are helping to build UBC into a leading Asia-Pacific university. And I'm very pleased to invite Dean Gage Averill to the stage to say a few words of welcome. Gage?
Thank you very much, and it is a delight to be here today. I first want to congratulate our graduating students. Thank you. You make this real for us. This was an idea 3 years ago, and we put something into progress a couple years later, and now we send you out into the world, knowing that you will do good work for the university, for Canada, for the globe. So congratulations, bravo. I hope to see many of you crossing the stage in the next few days in one of the 7 ceremonies in which I'll be shaking hands. Now, I'll let you know into a secret. I do ask almost everyone walking across the stage, unless I'm holding them up too much. Then I get a look from the chancellor that says, or the president says, hurry up. But I will try to talk with every graduating student. I only have a chance for a question or two, but it might be about what you're doing in the period ahead, how you enjoyed your experiences here, so you can be ready. I would encourage you not to say what some say when I ask them what's coming up next, and they say a party or a nap. So try to be just a little bit more creative than that. I'll just tell you a quick story. When I came to Toronto, first as I was at Toronto before UBC, in 2004, as Dean of Music there for a while, I had a graduate student to whom I became the advisor. And I don't think she'd mind me sharing her name. This is Parmala Tariwala from BC. And Parmala was a classical violinist, but she was studying some ethnomusicology, which is my area of interest. And Parmala was probably the leading classical violinist in improvisatory music in Canada. So when she had a request from the it's going to be the Canadian Association of Music, to present, she assumed it was on her area of expertise. She got to the conference. In the afternoon panel, where she was scheduled, there were 2 panels taking place simultaneously. One was classical music in Canada, the violin, I think Colin the violin, there was perfect, that was her area. The other was newcomer music. She was scheduled for newcomer music. So she found her way to the stage and the panel that was gathered, and then when it came her time, she just said, I think with a little bit of sarcasm, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. My grandfather came to Canada in 1905 as a lumberjack. working in BC in the camps. We've grown up in the shadow of the lumber industry in BC for 3 generations. And I don't really know anything about newcomer music. And this was a case where she was scheduled for that panel because her name, she had the exotic name, Atariwala. And the assumptions that were made were assumptions that she was indeed a very recent Canadian. In fact, this multi-generational, as Canadian as they get, coming to an immigrant to Canada like myself. My citizenship dates back only 2 years. This was a compelling story about the prejudices that we engage in on a daily basis. And so I thank you for your patience in me telling that story. But it points to some of the hurdles we have to get over. We know UBC has an extraordinary fact of geography. We are located in traditional ancestral territory of Musqueam people and have as our first priority, our first public commitment, a relationship with indigenous peoples of this continent and especially of this coast that we take as our highest public commitment. But we are also Canada's gateway to the Pacific Rim, to Asia. And we don't take that lightly either. This is a university in which an engagement with Asia, which also means an engagement with our Asian Canadian communities, is a part of our DNA. It's a part of our makeup. And by saying that, I don't mean to take lightly the task ahead of us, to never forget that. Comprehensive research universities aim to be a lot of things. They sometimes aim to be everything and to study everything. We have to remember that part of our address, part of our link to the rest of the world are these fundamental principles of geography. They are our place. You know UBC's still current plan, our strategic plan, place and promise, but this constitutes our place. But also constitutes a public commitment, a promise to our Aboriginal, our Indigenous friends and neighbors, and to the communities that have become so important to Canada and that link us to an emergent Asia, an Asia of the 21st century. So we are grateful, I think, I am grateful, to be here in the west coast of Canada, where we have this extraordinary geography. You may remember, and in fact it was alluded to just moments ago, what happened in 2012. The university was asked by various of its constituencies and also determined community activists to recognize the injustice that had been done to students at this university during World War II, to students of Japanese and Asian ancestry. And I'm sorry to say that the university didn't at first jump at that opportunity. It languished, and it took concerted effort, some reminders and what some people call nudging, a little help along the way, to recognize the importance of this. I was grateful to be on the committee, it's called the Tributes Committee, that looks at honorary degrees and graduations, and to have had this come across our committee's business. Because at that moment, I think everyone realized the historic importance of this recognition. And I use recognition really with a lot of emphasis, right? It's so important to recognize each other in this world, to understand the histories that we have been through, to understand the genealogies that produce the current moment. And this gave us a chance, gave the university a chance, and I thank everyone here who was involved in that process for helping us to recognize the trauma. And again, a word I don't use too lightly, the trauma that had been inflicted so long ago. And we did, as a university, rise to that challenge and decided to do 3 things, one of which was to create a new degree. I'm not sure many of you know that, but the degrees, the honorary doctorates that were given out had a new name. They were to repair the halls, or excuse me, repair the groves of academia, recognizing that an injustice had been done within the academic world. And we decided also to commit on an ongoing basis to the Asian Canadian experience through engagement. This university would not pick up that recognition of the students, award some honorary degrees, and then recede back into a cocoon. This was now an ongoing process of engagement from which we will never emerge. And we decided practically, and this event today is very much a part of that, and we decided practically to launch a degree, which is now called ACAM, or the Asian, Canadian, and Asian Migration Studies. So this event, this process has a history. I want to recognize everyone who was involved in that, who took the university to task, and who allowed us to rise to the bar, to realize the angels of our nature, to quote Abraham Lincoln. The Asian Canadian Community Engagement Initiative, ACCE, was modeled on that group that brought the university to that point, that juncture in its history. And then we had the fortune of allowing it to continue, to become embedded in the university, to become part of who we are, and to raise these issues before the university, one after another on an ongoing basis, about how we can best engage with colleagues across the world, especially with neighbors on the Pacific Rim and Asia. This is an ongoing importance, and we have, let me just tell you about a trip that I took about 2 years ago to China, in which China and Hong Kong, in which it became very clear to me the generational feedback at play. I was visiting, certainly I was trying to recruit students. You know, deans do that. They go out there and say, come to UBC. Here's why. And sometimes when we talk about being an international university, at a global university, people think we're just talking about students and money. I swear to it before you, I would bring as many international students as we have right now in this university, even if they brought no additional money. This is part of who we want to be. It's part of our ability to take students and move them throughout the world, to be leaders wherever they end up on the planet. It's part of our ability to take upon us research that can change the world, that engages communities all across the world without boundaries. It's part of our ability to create partnerships and allow for the flow of students' intellectual capital, ideas, promises around the globe. So I was there, yes, in part finding students. But I was also asked to visit our co-op placement students in Asia, and found that there were businesses all up and down the coast of China and Hong Kong employing our students in co-op. And in fact, many of them were just employing our students. They had decided not to look to other universities because those students were so good. And they were involved in intellectual property rights and a range of businesses in China. And I was also asked to talk to our alumni. I met many of them. And I realized we may be on the west coast of Canada, but our reach is all throughout this region. And many of those students will stay here. They'll contribute to Canada, they'll grow businesses, they'll bring new ideas. Many will return and will be a part of this great global flow of ideas, capital, and industry. It reminded me just what a global university this was and how deeply tied we are from generation to generation to our neighbors in Asia. UBC has a unique opportunity to build knowledge, to advance research, and to graduate year after year remarkable cohorts of students who go out to change the world. I am so honored to be a part of this process, and I'm also honored to be here today at this really important juncture for a program and an outreach, an ongoing engagement and outreach projects that speaks deeply about who and what UBC is. We want to remain vigilant, that we keep up this pressure, and we continue to recognize our special place and our promise, our public commitments. Thank you so much. Sorry, are you going to announce the conversation? Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gage. I also want to recognize a very special guest, Mr. Richard Lee, the MLA for Burnaby North. You can stand up and wave. Thank you. And thank you for your support of UBC's Asian Canadian initiatives. And so now I'm delighted to invite to the stage our special guests of honor, Dr. Robert Lee and Ms. Carol Lee. They will be joined by two students from ACAM's class of 2016, Christy Fong and Angela He. And they will also be joined by Professor Henry Yu from UBC's History Department, who will be moderating this conversation. So please join me in welcoming our special guests to the stage.
Yeah, turn it off. Thank you. So, it's my honor to be up here. I'm Henry Yu. I teach in the Department of History at UBC, and I was an undergraduate here. It'll date me, but 30 years ago. And when I was an undergraduate, I was struck. Usually, undergraduates don't care about who's on the Board of Governors because you're just worried about classes. I was struck at that time because for the first time in the history of the university, there was a Chinese Canadian on the Board of Governors, and that man was Robert Lee. We're at the 100th anniversary of UBC this year. We're celebrating it. Bob graduated from UBC in 1956. I was doing the math and I got it wrong. I said 50 years ago. Actually, Bob corrected me. It was 60 years ago. So in UBC's 100-year history, Bob was a student here 60 years ago. He was on the Board of Governors and began perhaps the deepest relationship UBC has had to one of its alumni 30 years ago, as he started as the Board of Governor, then became Chancellor. And those who are really out to lunch, you may not have noticed that we're sitting in the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center. So we're sitting in a building named after Bob Lee. And it's no accident. I mean, not only is this a beautiful building, a brand new building to celebrate our alumni coming back to UBC, but it's named in essence after someone who has had an incredible impact on UBC. You can read your program for a lot of the details, but let me just go over some of what I think is the important highlights. One is to actually quote our former president, Stephen Toop, as he said, and this is a kind of very telling quote, Robert Lee, as a man who remade the university we attend and the city we live in, so finding the quote, sorry, it's, where did it go? Yes, there it is, thank you. This is President Stephen Toop. Thank you. Carol's got the better script than I do for my own talk. In the Canadian context, there's no other person who has made a bigger difference to an institution of higher learning than Bob Lee. High praise coming from someone who ought to know, our president for 8 years, Stephen Toop. I also want to quote something from Jim Pattison. Many of you know who he is. He's one of the most prominent community leaders and businessmen. And Bob has done it all. He's raised a great family. He's been a contributor to the community. He's been a good businessman. He's been a good partner. I found doing anything with Bob is a pleasure. You don't worry about doing business with Bob. He's one of the good guys. In our community, what he tells you is real. And I think that's, in some sense, captures what an inspiration Bob has been to many people at UBC, as a leader, as one of the Board of Governors, as someone who's helped develop UBC. Lots of the buildings on this campus would not exist if it wasn't for him, asking people to help support UBC. Allard Hall, St. John's College, where I'm the principal. It wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Bob Lee during his time as Board of Governor and as Chancellor to go out and really ask people to help. The Chan Center, at the time, we didn't have a place for our students to graduate. I graduated in the gym. It was super hot and it was not very, we have the Chan Center. At the time, the single largest donation to UBC in its history was the Chan Center. That was Bob Lee's doing. Other buildings, they're listed. I had a chance last year actually, to walk around UBC. I'm a historian, so I'm interested in these. And Chris Hives is from the University Archives. We wanted to just have Bob talk about the story behind each of these buildings that now exist and wouldn't have existed if there hadn't been some quiet, persuasive cajoling from Bob Lee to help the university. And that's why this building's named after him. As Stephen Toop, our president, said, he's made the single greatest impact on a university in all of Canada, not just UBC. And so, that's why he's called Mr. UBC. There's a Trek magazine article that was called, Bob Lee, Mr. UBC. And when you use the phrase Bob Lee's UBC, it really is, but when you walk around the campus, there are all these parts of campus that really have been shaped by him. And so today, because it's the 100th anniversary, because of this long relationship, and because it's a graduation day for our students, we thought it would be great to have a conversation with our students, with Bob and his daughter Carol, and to talk not just about that kind of impact that I've described, that a lot of us do know and we're in this building, but also in some sense that personal relationship. Because he was a student in 1956, like the students out there right now, graduating as 22-year-olds. He wasn't the person yet who was going to remake Vancouver, remake BC, remake UBC. He was a student once. And in some sense, I think what's inspiring for me, thinking about when I was a student here in the 1980s, was that you can make a difference as a student with what you've learned here. That his negotiating skills, his business acumen that he picked up as a graduate of commerce here, that he went on to develop in his own business career, that was why he was able to help reshape UBC and Vancouver. And so our conversation today really is aimed in some sense at celebrating one of our greatest alumni and one of our greatest friends at the university, but also remembering that in those 60 years since he graduated, right, that's in some sense inspiration for our 22-year-olds and 25-year-olds and new graduates for thinking about not waiting to help make the world a better place, but you can start now. So I'm going to go sit down. I'm going to moderate it. That basically, just so you know, this is an informal conversation. We've got his daughter Carol, and it's been one of my pleasures, and just as a kind of informal introduction, to kind of get to know, in fact, I'd say Carol better than her dad, because I've had the chance and the privilege to work with her with something that we're going to talk about, which is the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation, which is one of these really right now a hot button issue in the news, but also something that is dear and near and dear to all of us, which is going to come up in our conversation. And it's interesting to kind of know them as people, not just as the name of a building. Not just the name of the Robert H. Lee YMCA building down on Burrard as you're driving past, or the Robert H. Lee Graduate School of Business, on campus. But Robert H. Lee, the person, the UBC grad, Carol, the person right now who's doing a lot of work in Chinatown, Lily, who's here, and Lily's just telling me that in fact, it's both sides of their family. That's tied to UBC. All her siblings' kids also were UBC grads. She was a UBC grad. She spent many years working in the downtown east side as a public health nurse. She's also a kind of another reflection of how the Lee family has been tied with community engagement and trying to make the world a better place right from the moments they graduated from UBC. So I'm going to sit down and, Angela He and Christy Fong, if you haven't met them through the graduation ceremony we had a little earlier, they're up here actually both because they're graduates of the program, the ACAM program, but also because Angela has been doing a lot of community work, and she's actually involved in some of the stuff in Chinatown and some of the things we're going to be talking about. And Christy, I love her thesis work. She worked on Chinese barbecued meats, right? And Carol's she's opening a barbecue meat restaurant in Chinatown. So there's all kinds of things that are going to come up that are going to be lots of fun. So I'm just going to go sit down and, we're going to start just having a conversation. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're here. It's a privilege, as I said, for me to be here, and I'm so glad you're able to be here and be part of the conversation as well. I need that. Okay, take yours. Okay. Yep. I think I stole yours. It's a more accurate one. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Lee, thank you again for sitting with us today, and Carol.
Very happy to be here.
As are we, and I'm really happy to kick off the conversation. So UBC, as we've gone through the history of your biography, has been a really big focus of your philanthropy and support. From being a student here to serving on the Board of Governors to being Chancellor, we can really readily see that you've committed a big portion of your life to UBC. Do you mind sharing with us your experiences here?
Well, you know, when I graduated from high school, I was a marginal, I just barely got through, and they accepted me here, and which was a big thing for my dad, knowing that I'm attending UBC. But, you know, when I was in high school, there were subjects that I wasn't interested in. So when I came to UBC, I took all the business courses, marketing, finance, which I was very, very interested in. So I graduated in marketing and finance, but I always liked real estate. So beginning of my career, I told my dad, I worked for my dad. You know, most Chinese families, they work for their dad, and we became the biggest importer of bamboo drapes in Canada. And that wasn't a big challenge that I wanted. I want a bigger challenge. So I said, I'm going to go into real estate as a salesman. So not many UBC graduates at that time would go into real estate as a salesman because you have to make sales to make income. But I thought, being in marketing, that I could sell. So after 3 years of suffering, you know, not making very much money, the Hong Kong, they had the bank run, and you know that back in '67. And all the wealthy Hong Kong people came to Canada, and who they approached, they said, who's selling commercial real estate in Vancouver? And my name came up because I knew that a lot of the vendors from bamboo drape business, selling them apartments in the closet, bamboo drape closets. So I got the whole 6 or 7 very wealthy people. And that year, I sold one of the largest buildings in the West End, and I made 10 times my annual salary working for my dad. So I told my dad, I said, this is what I've done. And he said, well, you're in the right business. So luckily, my brother took over my family business, and I went into real estate. So I had a very successful, I'm very, very lucky, okay? With all these people buying real estate from me, all the largest buildings in Vancouver, I sold in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So after that, I thought to myself, I was asked to be on the Board of Governors. And I said to myself, I said, what can I do? I'm just like you students here. When I graduated, I want to go into the business world and have a career. I never thought of UBC at that time. So I said, well, maybe I'll come to UBC for 3 years. Well, I've been here for 30-odd years. Half my business career I spent out at UBC. But the reason why I stayed is I really enjoyed it. And I think, I said, how can I make a difference? When you're on any board, like I was on quite a few boards, CN, TELUS, and all these boards, and I said, if I'm there, I got to contribute to help it make it better. So when I went to UBC, when I was on the Board of Governors, I said, gee, I'm not an academic, but I said, gee, I like this real estate around here. So I said, maybe I should form a real estate company, which was very, very hard to do at that time because no one wanted to cut trees down and so on. So that started my career at UBC and being in the property division of the Board of Governors. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? Maybe you want to tell them too how hard it was when you, in 1956, for you to get a job. So it wasn't quite as easy as you made it sound.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was not a bad student. I was near the top quartile. and so I took a dozen pictures of myself. And I said, I want to work for CIL, Hudson Bay, Woodward's, or any of these big department stores or commercial buildings. So I took a dozen pictures of myself, and I applied to all these places, okay? So I never had a call. One call. So I said, I'm smarter than some of the students that I graduated with. How come they all get jobs? So I went to my professor, and I said, look, how come they all get jobs, and I never had any offer, except one. And he said, well, they don't hire Chinese people or for executive position. So that was 60 years ago, okay? So at that time,
Not that long ago.
That long time ago. And besides, I'm probably the only Chinese student in my class out here. Maybe 2 other students. So we were different, you know, from the rest of the class. So it was very hard at that time, the beginning, for me to get a job. But I was lucky. I got a job from Randy Evans. I still remember the guy's name because he's outstanding. He gave me a job at Canada Packers. So I worked there for 1 year until my dad had a very serious heart attack. And my dad said, well, you got to come back, look after the business. And my experience with my dad was unbelievable. I was 25 years old by then, 26, and my dad had a heart attack. And he says, Bob, you're the only son graduate from university. The rest are still going to school. You got to run the company. Well, my dad was very successful, and he said, you take over the bank accounts, you take over everything. And I said, Dad, I only had 2 years experience. Doesn't matter, you'll learn. So, you know, it was the most tough 2 years because it wasn't my money to start with, my dad's money. And I had to be so careful that I don't lose it because it's so easy to lose it. So luckily, in those 2 years, I was unlucky in a way. I bought a lot of things that didn't show any income, which I learned later on that you got to have cash flow. I didn't learn that at that time. And so luckily things went up, and I sold all the land that didn't have cash flow, and I converted it into building income properties, and that was the big thing. And while I was successful in business, Peter Wall of Wall Financial approached me. He says, Bob, you bought one of our buildings, and you didn't put any subjects in there, and I want to meet you. So I met with him, and he said, I want you to come work for me. He's younger than I am. And I says, no, I'm not going to work. I'm going to stay with my company. 6 months later, he says, Bob, I want to see you. He said, you own a third of the company. The three partners, Peter Wall, Peter Radikoff, and myself. So I left in '67 from H.A. Roberts, and I joined that company that owns Shannon News and downtown, the Wall Center. So we're building a lot of projects. So luckily, I got involved with there, and I'm still a big shareholder there. And but I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day operation because my kids were graduating from UBC in '80. So I want to start my own company so that I can let my children have an opportunity to come into the business. So that was evolving.
Actually, I'm glad you brought up I'm a historian, so often I see the past for what it was like in the 1950s, and sometimes, you finish school, no one hires you because you're Chinese, but then you let it go. I think it's very human to kind of that was then. You made it on your own. You get through it, and I think, Carol, I'm glad you brought that up because in some sense it's past. It's past. But I think part of what I think younger people need to know is, it sounds so like I'm a parent or something, but often history, if you didn't live through it, you might not realize some of those challenges. It was a different time in the 1950s and 60s. Lots of people, when they graduated, there were accounting firms that wouldn't hire you, and it was known because you weren't white, you were Asian, you were Chinese or Japanese or South Asian, and so again, it's a credit to your story in some sense that you were able to overcome it. But I think it's important to put it into that kind of historical context. Talking about struggles, I think one of the things that, from the point of view of UBC, probably the single most important moment was the 1980s and 90s when I was an undergraduate here. It was actually a single most important moment, you could say, in UBC because of Bob Lee being on the Board of Governors and being Chancellor and producing something that makes UBC distinctive in Canada, which is the property trust. The idea that there would be an endowment built that really reshapes the whole way that campus actually operates. Again, many people who maybe don't know the financial workings of UBC don't realize how important it is and how it's actually really reshaped UBC to become one of the top universities in the world. So I know it was a struggle, to convince actually people to do it. So I don't know, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it wasn't a great idea to other people when you first came up with it, was it?
Well, like I said, I was on the board and I was in charge of properties, And I think I'm probably the only person ever been on the board that specializes in real estate. And you know what? You don't want to develop all that land that we have, like university endowment land, where they subdivide lots. I said, you make nothing. You make a couple $100 million. And for the university, I had to go into $1 billion. Okay, it was 30 odd years ago. I says, in my mind, I couldn't say that to the board because they say you're crazy, you're dreaming. So I said, let's start. So luckily, I had David Strangway, who was the president at that time, and I said, David, you know what? We got all this land. This produced some revenue to help the university. It's discretionary funds. People that donate to the university say they're going to go to the faculty of medicine. They're going to go this, going to this. But you don't have anything that you can expand on your thoughts about expanding different areas. You need money to do that. So I said, let's develop some of the land. I couldn't say 500 acres because I checked the whole map. We have 1,000 acres that the government gave us in 1920 or something like that. And so I said, I'm not going to do 500 acres because I would have been defeated right away. So I said, well, give me a site on 16th and Westbrook, because I looked at the whole map. I said, 16th and Westbrook, 28 acres. And in my mind, I said, gee, I probably could produce 50 million. And the key to the whole thing is that I'm going to lease the land. And no one believed I could lease land in Vancouver. Because they say, everybody, including Jack Poole, who has his hall, Michael Dane, who's a big developer, all the developers said, Bob, you're not going to be successful. So I said, well, I'm going to try. So we divided into 10 lots, and no one bid. So I said, gee, how am I going to correct this? And they said, well, we're going to change. I said, no, I need some time. So to make a long story short, I phoned my good friend in Hong Kong, George So, who built the tunnel, the first tunnel, and we look after his real estate here. And on the phone, I said, George, I need $8 million to be the first. You'll be the first developer on Hampton Place, and I want you to do that. And I said, when did you get your son over here to handle it, and I'll give you a hand. And on the phone, he said yes. So even at that time, I didn't know it would be successful. So he came over, and we developed the first one on the corner of Westbrook, okay, of the Hampton Place. And halfway through, everything was sold. So I went like this at the board. I said, it was like a dream, because you know what that means? It means in 99 years, UBC will get another 10 billion, maybe 20 billion, depending on what the value of that land. Today, we're going to get, well, right now, my estimation is about 2-3 billion. So you can imagine 99 years from now, or 78 years from now, we're going to receive such a huge amount because of that one thing. And I think that, to me, I'm really proud I did that for the university.
Can I just say one thing? Just to give you a little bit of a sense of the context. So at the time he started, like the endowment for the entire university, I think, was only about $50 million. And even his own family didn't believe him, because, you know, I remember you came home and you were telling Mom, oh, you know, I've got this dream that I want to create $1 billion endowment for the university. And my mother goes, you mean $1 million, right? And he goes, no, $1 billion with a B, you know? Yeah. So even he had a hard time with him because it was such a game changer. It was such a big idea. And you know, sometimes when you have these big ideas, it's hard to get people on board. And I appreciate Henry sort of giving that background, because once an idea becomes something that everybody understands is a good idea, everybody then is on the bandwagon. But they don't understand.
Took 10 years.
Took 10
years to say that this is the right thing to do. And it took me 2 years from 85 to 87 to convince all the board members that this is the right thing to do. And you know, I met with each of the directors and I told them, and they said, well, look, the government will fund us. I said, this is discretionary money, and it's like getting out of the air. We own it. So let's make it so such a way that we get the endowment. The other thing is this, it goes in endowment, and they can only spend the income. They can't spend the capital. So I know that that amount will stay there forever for UBC, and it'll grow. But today they allow 3%, okay? So, but if they do have an emergency, like some of the law school, they had an emergency, because if they don't bill within a certain time, the government stopped funding. So the president had to make a decision. So he said, okay, we'll take this fund over here, but we'll replenish it with the income in the future year to make sure that capital stays there. And I made it a rule that has to be. Otherwise, it's easy to spend capital and you have nothing at the end of the day. And I didn't want that to happen.
I think we're hearing why he was such an important figure in our history. And I think it's so important for us to hear it from your own voice and to have Carol up there to kind of, in some sense, in all the years I've known Bob, he's an incredibly humble guy. You've seen and heard it already, I think, today. And in some sense, I think a lot of us don't know how important that vision is. Right? And I think that is something that is inspiring to a lot of our young students. And so I can
add one more thing. You know what? When we were the GVRD, which controls all the housing markets in the Lower Mainland, allowed us 10 million square feet and 50,000 square feet of commercial. I said, how can that be? This whole community, 50,000 square feet, the supermarket will take 35,000. I said, we need at least 100. No, we're not allowed because the politicians on 10th Avenue didn't want any competition. So we're allowed to only do that. So in the meantime, I said, gee, that's not right for the university. So I said, we're going to save all the land around the shopping center that we can expand to 100,000 square feet. That was 30 years ago. 30 years ago. No, maybe, yeah, 30 years ago. Then after 15 years after, I said, now's my time to make a change. So I went to see Gordon Campbell. I said, Gordon, you know what? They allowed us 10 million square feet and 50,000. That's crazy. That's the same density as we have in South Granville, not like the West End. I think we have to increase the density to create another amount, just a stroke of pen of what you can do. So I explained to him how it should be done. So he can take the land back from GVRD, and the government can take it back and then give it to UBC. So behind the scene, I did all that, and they got the land back when he was still premier. And when we got the land back, I told this will really help university. So I increased the density from 10 million to from 1.2 FSR to 2, and I increased the commercial from 50,000 to 100,000 square feet, and that raised the bar from 1 billion to 2 billion. And I heard from my CEO that we're going to raise probably 3 billion because of the way the price is going now. So it's behind the scene and the networking that you have to do to get this. Because the other thing is this. We want to build more residence for students, okay? Which I agreed to. I said, look, we need more. We're trying to accomplish 50% of the students to have accommodation at UBC here. So they need $100 million. So they went to Victoria. We need $100 million to build a residence. They said, no, we can't give it to you because it would affect our balance sheet. So they came to talk to us, UBC Property Trust. I said, oh, you need $100 million? Well, all the commercial buildings that Martha Piper gave us the money to invest in rentals and the shopping center instead of giving it to the endowment, and all that money belongs to the university. Okay, so we said, look, we got to this after appraisal. This is just a year ago before Stephen Toop retired. We got $200 million worth of appraisal surplus and all the rentals we have. We can sell all the rentals and the shopping center, and our net profit would be about $200 million. So the bank gave us $100 million that morning because of our assets that we have, which is separate from the university. So that's the reason why when I started forming UBC Property Trust, we're not going to be on campus. I select all the directors because I pick the best people that are in the business. Tax people, Randy Zine, who's the chairman now, and Al Parker, specialized in commercial, Jim Houston, who's specialized in residential. I got all the special people that are on my board. So that gave us the vehicle outside of UBC, gave us the chance to have this money independently from the university to give them the flexibility to build more student housing. That's how it was done.
So if you're living in student housing, if you ever lived in student housing, you owe it to the... I mean, it's interesting to kind of think about it this way, because when I was an undergraduate in the 1980s, virtually no one lived on campus. You had a lottery. You got kicked out of campus residence after a year or two because there weren't enough units, right?
There's no place to have coffee.
Yeah, so to go to the point where you can have coffee now on campus, decent coffee too, but also to have 50% of our students is the aim. Half of our undergraduates, and we've grown, half our undergraduates to be able to live on campus. And that's, again, a dream that I think a lot of people thought was ludicrous. But again, it's something that
But if you think about it, in some ways, he created a money tree. You know, I mean, something that we've all kind of dreamed about having. But, you know, a money tree that blooms every 100 years. And I think that the endowment, I mean, the money that they'll get in, let's say, 80 years is probably going to be more, it'll be more like 50 billion. It'll actually allow UBC to probably have one of the largest endowments of any university in North America.
Yeah.
For sure in Canada.
For sure in Canada.
For sure in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've nailed his impact on UBC. For those who haven't, any doubts, you can come to do a little Q&A afterwards with me as a historian. But I actually want to move it over to kind of right now. And you know, you were the chairman of the last campaign that raised again $1.5 billion, or I think $1.6 billion for the university. But right now, what's going on? And you know, Christy and Angela both doing some Chinatown work, and I don't know, you want to change the subject for us, Christy?
So in my undergraduate thesis, I did a lot of research on barbecue meats, namely the masters that work in that field and the protests that happened in 1968. So personally, I've had a growing interest in Chinatown, even though I'm personally from Richmond. And I'm kind of curious about why you're interested in Chinatown as well, both you and Carol.
Well, you know, I was born in Chinatown many years ago. And you know what? It was a viable community. You go down there after dance or social, you go have a suya, you know, which is a snack. And there'd be about 20 restaurants down Chinatown in those days. And we all mingled down there. And it was so vibrant, and people were handing there. And today, people moved out to Richmond and so on. But my heart is still down Chinatown because my dad was very much involved with Chinatown in the 20s and 30s when he first came over, and he was very active. He started the Chinese Merchant Association, the Lions Club, and he was in charge of the Lee Association for 30 years. He started the Chinese public school, been principal for 30 years. So my dad was very much involved. So because I was born there, and my life was down there in the early years, that my thoughts are still with them, but I didn't have the time to even see the degrading of Chinatown till Carol moved down there, and she took over my dad's building. Her office is there, and she said, we should revive Chinatown again. So that's going to be my next project. And I would say this, that it's going to be a lot harder than what I did at UBC. Because UBC, I was the boss, okay? Like, all I do is report to the board of directors and tell them what I'm doing. And most of them agree, because when you give them a check, they agree with you, right? So in Chinatown, it's all politics. It's it's everything else. So I've just told Carol, what you're doing is going to be a lot tougher than what I did at UBC. Yeah. So I thank her for doing it, because I think Chinatown they should have some activities there and get people to move down there. And she's doing that. She's bought 2 restaurants. She's opening a barbecue place, and she knows nothing about that business.
I will soon, though.
I wish her the best, and I said I will help you. So that's where I stand. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask Carol, why Chinatown? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think that, you know, our family had a lot of history in Chinatown, because at the time we grew up, that was kind of the place that we went. My grandfather was still alive, so probably once a week we would go down there for a family dinner. My father, I'm actually working in a building we bought in 1921, and there's always been somebody in the family who's worked in Chinatown. So it's really kind of a home base. And even though we moved to my father moved away, then we grew up in the North Shore, I think our hearts are still in Chinatown. So I'd moved away, I went away to school, I lived in Hong Kong, and I came back in 2004. And I went back to Chinatown, I was like, oh my goodness, what's happening to the neighborhood? So I decided that, you know, the old adage is, you know, be the change that you want to see. So how can I expect things to get better if I'm not willing to actually go there and be part of that change? So So I set my office up. I shared an office with my aunt, Vera, and my Uncle Jack, and sort of got involved in the neighborhood. And as my father said, you know, over time you realize how complicated a job this is. Although his job was very difficult, this is very hard, and there's a number of you out there that we work together. I'm very grateful to see Kelly and Judy and Stephen and June and Doris and maybe some others who we're sort of collectively seeing what we can do to try and bring some vitality back to Chinatown. But one of the things that I thought we really needed was a little bit more resource. And so we set up a Vancouver Chinatown Foundation about 6 years ago, and I'm very lucky that both Henry and my father are on the board. Some other names that might be familiar to you since you're out here are Caleb Chan and Robert Ho and Brent Louie and Peter Ng. Some of these sort of, they were Chinatown people, maybe not so much there now, but they have roots, and I think that a lot of them really appreciate the importance of trying to save this neighborhood. You know, if you think about it, the neighborhood was established in 1885, and it represents a lot of sacrifice, you know, in a way, of the people who were there. So I think it's our job to look after it, and it's an important part of the history of this city, of this province, and this country. So it's an ambitious project, but it's interesting to see as we work along, and I'm lucky, you know, Angela, Christy, and then Elizabeth here. Elizabeth graduated from Henry's program last year, and she's been working with me. So I think there's a lot of interest, and some of the youth have asked me, it's like, well, why didn't the elders look after the neighborhood better? And, you know, once again, getting back to Henry's context, this for them was kind of a ghetto. It was a place that they had to be in. As soon as anybody became successful, they all kind of left. So they didn't see it as a place that, how we see it now, as this very special place, something that needs to be preserved and cherished. So it's wonderful, because without the youth, without you guys, this next generation, Chinatown actually doesn't have a future. So you're the future.
Thanks for bringing, I mean, in a way, you brought it around full circle. I mean, you know, your dad, yeah. You know, 3 generations later, Carol, but I think it's also tying to our own graduates. I mean, again, Christy and Andrew are just some of the examples of the students who are getting involved in this kind of work. And I'd say maybe as a, you know, building off of what Carol said, I think one of the main, you know, themes I've heard in the discussion is actually how to give back. You know, when we say community engagement, when we say let's, you know, go out and change the world, make the world a better place, but what is it really to do that? And sometimes it's about having something concrete to work on. And I'm so glad that, you know, the work that Carol you're doing, and with now your dad, all that smarts and wisdom behind it is to kind of, you know, bring students aboard too. Bring some of our ACAM grads, and I would also throw it as a challenge. We've got some people here. VP Phillips who's only been on the job less than 6 months, but for those who don't know him, he's VP External Engagement. And one of the things is this vision of UBC as not waiting until you graduate and then sending you out and go make change. It's like let's actually give you the tools, and let's help you. You know, as with Christy's work and with Angela's internships and with Liz and others of our graduates. I mean, I think ACAM is a model program, you could say, for going out and starting to learn how to make change while you're still a student, while you're still learning. And that I think is maybe a nice way to tie, you know, this portion of it up. And looking back 60 years to when Bob, you were here as an undergraduate, you know, Carol was here as an undergraduate, I was here as an undergraduate, and now we have this sort of latest generation is. And so I would also, we're going to have a sign up in sheet, in fact. And this is kind of like old-fashioned organizing, community organizing. Like if you are inspired at all about doing something with Chinatown, with helping out, with say the Chinatown Foundation, with joining Christy and Angela, you know, we're going to put a sign-up sheet over there. You know, I remember being brought there in the 70s. You know, when I was 4 years old, my grandfather would take me, walk me down there, and all the old men in the cafes, they would just sort of get so excited to see a young person, right, a grandson. They would all be congratulating my grandfather just for like having a child who had another child. You know what I mean? It was sort of like a low bar for ecstatic behavior. But it was because so many of them never got to have, you know, because of racism, because of immigration exclusion. A lot of those men were actually living out their days alone, you know, in Chinatown. And so I think those who really helped build BC, Vancouver, people who grew up in Chinatown. I mean, one of my things I've inspired in working with Carol is that, you know, we should find a place in Chinatown as a, you know, maybe it needs a new use. Maybe one of the things is to honor our elders and to have sort of a lot of seniors care, you know, there, and seniors housing and things like that, that really would, I think, in some sense, be the way that honors those who've come before us and who've helped build Vancouver and Chinatown. So we're going to put that sign-up sheet, and, you know, if you want to help, you know, sign up. And if you're a student at UBC and you're part of the program, or you're here, get others, you know, use those social media tricks that you have, you know, get people organized. You know, we got Doris and June and others from the YCC, the Youth Collaborative for Chinatown. It's not just for Chinese Canadian communities. I think the discussion today is in some sense about what ACAM's about, that for all the Asian Canadian communities that
Canadians.
And, you know, First Nations that maybe weren't part of the original vision of Canada as an inclusive place. But, you know, we've remade it. You know, just like Bob having trouble getting a job in the 50s because of the color of his skin and the color of his hair. You know, we're living in a different place, but it's still an ongoing struggle to save places like Chinatown and make it something for us all. So I want to thank, you know, Angela, Christy, especially Bob and Carol, for joining us, for taking time out of your really busy schedule to help inspire us here out at UBC, and to continue that long engagement. So please join me in thanking all of our speakers, thanking Carol and Mr. UBC himself, Bob Lee.
Well, you students got a great future, okay? I remember sitting exactly where you are, and I thought just business. I didn't even think of UBC at that time. It took me a few years to think about it. But you never know what you can do, okay? Like, I never thought I could do all the things I've done. But you never know. So you have a vision, have an idea, what you have a passion for, and go for it, okay?
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you to our speakers today. I would like to now ask Alan Fan, who's one of the graduates of ACAM this year, to come and help present a gift to Dr. Lee and Carol Lee on behalf of ACAM and the Asian Canadian Community Engagement Initiative. So, Alan? Oh.
They're macaroons. My favorite cookie, my favorite cookie.
Thank you very much again. I would like to now invite Dr. Philip Steenkamp to the stage. Philip joined UBC last December as Vice President of External Relations. He's responsible for government, community, and corporate relations, as well as for fostering UBC's reputation as a globally influential university. And so Philip will deliver some remarks. Philip?
Well, thanks so much, Chris. And my only complaint about today is the conversation was too short. There were so many stories there, and I was so fascinated to listen to them. And I really want to thank you, Bob, and Carol, and Angela, and Christy, and Henry. It was just an entire privilege to be here today and to listen to just a little bit of that. And I look forward to many, many more discussions about this. I would like to recognize Elder Larry Grant and Gina Grant, who participated in the graduation ceremony earlier, and also to acknowledge our presence here on unceded, ancestral, and traditional territories of the Musqueam people. That's a remarkable relationship we have with the Musqueam. And for those of you who were here for the raising of that extraordinary pole a few weeks ago, it was one of the most moving experiences I've had at UBC. I want to congratulate the graduating class of the Asian Canadian and Asian Migration Studies program, but also to congratulate and thank your parents and your friends and the faculty and the others who supported you throughout your studies, because I know how important that support is. I'd also like to acknowledge the leadership and support that Dean Gage Averill has provided. It's extraordinary, your leadership and your commitment to this program and more generally to that engagement with the Asian Canadian communities. And I think the program of studies in the afternoon's events reflect our commitment to and our engagement with Asian Canadian communities. The century of ties between UBC and Asian Canadian communities informs, and I would say immeasurably enriches, learning and research opportunities. Now, Dr. Martha Piper, our president, would not forgive me if I didn't take the opportunity to remind everybody that UBC is among the top 20 public universities in the world, and it's among the top 6 public universities in North America. And I would say it's no coincidence because of this tie to the Asian Canadian community and to Asia. And a number of you spoke about place and promise. We are an extraordinary place here on the western end of Canada, but that gateway to Asia is incredible. This is what will make us truly great and take us to that next level. And the promise of this place is extraordinary. And I was so moved, Bob, to hear you talk about the promise that you recognized 30 years ago. Here we are sitting on this incredible endowment, and you have found a way to realize the value of this astonishing endowment. And this, again, is why UBC is great and why UBC will be even greater. While there are many things to celebrate, there are also reminders of a very challenging history, and there has been some comment today about the challenges of that history. We've heard about the removal of Japanese. We obviously know about the Chinese head tax. There's a long history of anti-Asian racism. I was struck last week by the Prime Minister's apology regarding the Kamogato Maru incident. And that's important movement, but we need to deepen our knowledge and understanding of the contributions, experiences, and histories of all Asian Canadian communities. And I'm so proud to be at UBC to see that we are participating in that movement. The university's commitment to engagement must reflect our place and our diversity as we work to build stronger, mutually beneficial relations into the next century. UBC is so fortunate to have Dr. Bob Lee and the entire Lee family as part of our alumni. And I didn't realize, Liddy, how many of your family are alumni too, but how lucky we are. And how fortunate we are to welcome new generations of alumni who, as a part of both UBC and broader communities, can continue to work to enhance Asian Canadian engagement. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for the invitation. It's been an extraordinary afternoon, and I also want to congratulate again all of the students. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So the next segment of the afternoon will be a look back at UBC's history from an Asian Canadian lens. But first we're going to take a short 5-minute break. You can stretch. During the break, I'm actually going to ask our guests to stay for a photograph on stage. I'm also going to ask ACAM graduating students, as well as ACCE members, as well as ACAM staff and faculty to come to the front. We'll take a few photographs. So we'll see you all in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Can you please find your seats? We are now going to move into the next segment of our afternoon. So for the past year, ACAM and the Asian Canadian Community Engagement Initiative has been sponsoring a special UBC Centennial Alumni project entitled Retelling UBC's History from an Asian Canadian Lens. Now, this project would not have been possible without the amazing work of our project lead, Dominique Bautista. Dominique was a member of last year's ACAM graduating class, which puts her in the first class of ACAM graduates. And she completed the Centennial Alumni Project while studying for a Bachelor of Education degree here at UBC. So I'm really delighted to now turn the program over to Dawn in order to introduce the project as well as some of the people who we're going to hear from this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Dominique Bautista.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know taking time out of your busy work days, especially coming after a long weekend. I hope that you've enjoyed the food. And I'm very grateful today for all of you. This is kind of our tribute to the community. This work, I will repeat this over and over and endlessly, this work doesn't exist without the help of the community. And so how did this all start? As Chris mentioned, my name is Dominique Bautista. I graduated very proudly last year from ACAM, and since then I've been working on my Bachelor of Education degree as well, while working on these 5 alumni projects. But it really goes a lot further than that, a lot further back. In fact, when I was a little girl, I would often find myself kind of headfirst onto my grandmother's lap, sprawled on her bed, particularly at bedtime whenever she would come visit us in Manila or Vancouver. And she would often make kind of this deal with me. She would tell me a bedtime story if I actually pretended to fall asleep. And so, you know, I would say, okay, and she would recount tales of what it was like for her moving from China to the Philippines, and what it was like when there was Japanese occupation of Manila, and what it was like when my mother was growing up, and all these different stories. And after the end of that, I would often remain a lot more awake than I would asleep. But that was kind of our thing. And I think back, and now in my 20s, it really hasn't changed. Last December, I was in Hong Kong, and I found myself sprawled once again on her hotel room bed, and she said to me, "Shobe, lai tiang guama gang go si. Come listen to Grandma tell you some stories." And so, stories. What is it about stories? As an English graduate, stories just have this really evocative nature. Is it the people who tell them? Is it about the content? Is it about where it's told? And for some reason, whatever it is, memories have the ability to latch on into your memory, and they last endless amounts of times, and you come back to them, you retell them, you learn them, and you learn from them. And that's kind of what this project has truly been about. It's been about stories and our ability to learn from the stories. In fact, today we're going to be sharing a lot of histories, or because I'm a girl, her story, and it's going to be taking part in the form of 5 different video vignettes. And our hope is that these video vignettes are something that we can learn from. To borrow from one of my mentors, who is actually outside and not in here right now, a common history is needed in order for us to understand our common future. So a common past for a common history. And that's kind of what we're hoping to bring about today. A conversation about our histories, rethinking the dialogue around Vancouver, UBC, Canada, and what it means to be Asian Canadian. So, today's stories are going to take, as I mentioned, 5 video vignettes, and they're stories offered by very generous individuals who are here with us today. We have the story of Miss Chitose Uchida. We have the story of Mr. Teja and Jerry Hundle. We have the story of Mr. Somagana-san, Oscar Bisnar, and Tony Weggy. So we have 5 stories today, and I'm going to start off the afternoon by asking Fred Hume, UBC's very own historian, to come tell us a little bit about the story of UBC's very first graduate, and how, quite innocuously as he would say, how we came across this particular story. Fred?
Thank you, Dominique. I hope you don't mind if I refer to my notes. Prevents me from wandering, which I have a tendency to do. Thank you very much for the invitation, Dominique, and for everybody. My name is Fred Hume, and I've been associated with UBC since the 1980s, and along the way I've had the pleasure of working with Henry Yu, a couple of projects, and more recently the pleasure of working with Dominique. One thing I've realized is that I enjoy discovering stories, especially those that pertain to Vancouver history and particularly UBC history. And that I feel UBC's always been part of my life. I bleed blue and gold. I graduated from UBC, my sisters, aunts, uncles all attended UBC, yet I never envisioned myself actually working here. This film, produced by Dominique and her team, tells of a discovery and the story of a historic old building, a pioneer UBC student, and a little bit of Japanese Vancouver history. It tells of how, walking along Powell Street with my camera, I just happened to notice on an old dilapidated building, 439 Powell, a poster with a young woman's picture with the words Tose Uchida, McGill University College of BC, 1914. Knowing McGill University College was the precursor to UBC, I was intrigued.
and wanted to know who Tozi was and if by any chance she was a pioneering UBC student. She was indeed the first Japanese Canadian student and graduate of UBC. In fact, she graduated in UBC's very first graduating class in 1916. In her UBC graduating yearbook, she is described as shy and reserved, and also petite. Her aim in life was to do nice things unnoticed, and in later life wished to be thought of as a sweet old lady. Interesting to note that when Tozi died in 1989, she was the last surviving member of that very first UBC grad class. I'm sure she was a sweet old lady as well. I learned that Tozi never married, but through extensive research was able to locate Tozi's niece, who also happened to be a UBC graduate. It was at this point I was introduced by Shirley to Dominique, and she showed an amazing interest in this story, and she was the one who contacted Tozi's niece and introduces her to us in this film, putting a current face to this family. So from noticing in passing some intriguing signage on one of the Japanese community's few remaining original buildings, we discover a piece of Vancouver and UBC history, along with someone today connected with that story. And thanks to Dominique, a new dimension has been created through this film, which brings to our attention this particular piece of our shared history. Thank you, Dominique, and thank you, Henry. Thank you.
So our first film is entitled, it's about building community, and as Fred mentioned, there's a play on words because I am an English major. Building community, literally the building, 439 Powell Street, as it was a historical building, and also talking about a little bit the Powell Street community, the Japantown, so building community in that way. Hope you enjoy. All right, so social media plug, for those of you who are just joining us, if you hashtag ACAM100, we're hoping to live tweet today's event. And now I'm going to call upon our second kind of interviewees, the Hundle family. Do you mind making your way onto the stage? So when I first heard about this research project, it was back in July last year, and quite often I was working out of the back office in St. John's, down there, in a very kind of, in a room where there were no windows, and so I would kind of sit there and quite periodically have these moments of research like euphoria, and there would be nobody there to celebrate with me, so I would save up these events for when I saw Denise or I saw Chris, and I would bombard them in person, my excitement. And one of these moments of excitement was when I randomly decided that I was going to sign up for Punjab Digital Library Online, which, if you don't know, is a South Asian online web portal primarily publishing in Urdu. Now, I don't understand, read, speak Urdu, but I decided that I was going to look a little bit into their family story, a particular court act of grace that they had mentioned to me, and by some stroke of luck, there was an article published about their family written in English, and so that was one of these moments, and this film is made out of this moment. So I'd like to welcome to the stage, she's kind of a VIP because you probably all recognize her from the photos, but Satwan Sandhu, Selena Johal, and Amar Johal, and Amar's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Dominique. First of all, I'd like to, on behalf of the Hundle family, thank Dominique and UBC for bringing this story back to life. It's interesting. Actually, how it started from my perspective was my wife and I were at a fundraiser for the 100-year journey of the South Asian community. And as I was exiting, I had bumped into an old professor of mine from, SFU. Dr. Johnson, who had been active in retelling the story through the Kamogatamaru of the South Asian community. And I'd mentioned, oh, by the way, I married into the Hundal family. And he goes, oh, yeah, Tage and Jerry, and I know this young lady. She'd be really interested in talking to you. So I gave him my business card and didn't think much of it. But sure enough, Dominique reached out to us, and from there, we were able to share this story. And it's interesting, there's all sorts of stories about immigrants coming to the country, but what was important for us, I think, is when you bring these stories back to life, you remember what the struggles they went through. They had some fun stories as well, and I don't know, I'm sure you're going to talk about this one. When Granny, I call my mother-in-law Granny, when she was born, Uncle Jerry couldn't go to UBC that day because his father had told him to stay home because they used to live on Alma Street. The cow was going to be given birth. The kitten was going to have kittens, and Granny's mom was going to give birth to Granny. So there was a lot of stuff going on those days. But you also are reminded of the struggles that they went through, the challenges of being Asian in this country, and what they had to do to give us the ability to come to this country. And when you think of that, really to forget what they did is a bit of a, that's why I love this program. It reminds us of what they did. And we are successful, and we live on their shoulders. We stand on their shoulders to make this country great. So I'm really grateful for that. So thank you.
So just as Amar kind of alluded to, and I will mention this endlessly, there are so many thanks that I have to give to the community, and just as Amar mentioned, through word of mouth, for people who just pass on a phone number, this project, having connections. I mean, what I can do is I can try and locate people, but that'll only go so far, and this project really thrived because of word of mouth in the community, so thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the second film. So the main motivation behind the series of vignettes is to uncover or reveal lesser-known narratives about Asian Canadian presence here in Vancouver, here at UBC, here at Canada. And this particular film is no different. In fact, it actually holds a very special place in my heart for a number of different reasons. But mainly because I think it highlights essentially the community work that ACAM does. So this next film is a snapshot of kind of the opening of ties between the Filipino community here in Canada and UBC. And we had the wonderful opportunity sitting down with Dr. Aprodisio Lakian and Mr. Oscar Bisnar, or as I kind of affectionately refer to them, Tito Oscar and Tito Prod. And unfortunately, they aren't able to join us here today for a number of different reasons. And I think that kind of highlights the fact, the kind of work that we encounter here when we do with ACAM, the fact that, there is kind of a time pressure when we are, we're tasked with memorializing stories from the past. And so we were lucky enough to be able to talk to both of these gentlemen. And another facet of the community work is the fact that we have so much support from those people who are part of it. And so despite the fact that the Lakians and the Bisnars are unable to be here today, I still see faces from the Filipino community who are here anyway to support the history and a memorable milestone event in Filipino-Canadian history. Mr. Bisnar actually wanted to share some remarks, so I'm going to read it to you. They're from Toronto, so here we go. UBC's Centennial Celebration and the coincidental Philippine Consulate's 60th anniversary have caused much self-reflection. I didn't fully appreciate while growing up that I was first in a number of ways, that I was the first ever Filipino to attend elementary school here, that my sister and I were likely the first Filipinos to study at UBC, and that my family was one of the first Filipinos to live in the entire country because my father was asked to open diplomatic relations between Philippines and Canada. Considering all the trailblazing circumstances, UBC undoubtedly had the greatest impact on my maturity, knowledge, worldview, and career. Many thanks to ACAM for providing this opportunity to be retrospective and to be reminded how privileged I am to live in Canada and to have UBC as my alma mater. So I hope you enjoy this third clip. I think the eyebrow raise was my favorite part. Yeah, after he did that, he said, okay, we're done filming. So the next film, we're kind of in the theme of Southeast Asia at this point, and the next film is an interview with Tony Weggie, who attended UBC on scholarship, and he is one of the 5 vignettes that's actually taken from the perspective of a graduate student. Fortunately, Tony is actually working in Indonesia right now, so he also asked that I share some remarks on behalf of him. He says, having the opportunity to study at UBC was never imagined in my life until I set foot on this beautiful Point Grey campus in July 1991. It was absolutely an overwhelming experience as an Indonesian student that had never been abroad and now was admitted to one of the most prestigious universities in Canada. I still cherish that moment. Now, UBC is celebrating its centennial year, a milestone that we are all proud of. I think UBC has become one of the leading universities in the Pacific Rim that captures the dynamic of this region, which is showed in the increased Indonesian student enrollment, as well as other Asian countries. Congratulations to ACAM for giving me this opportunity to be part of the celebration. I hope through this interview that we had, we will inspire more students from Indonesia to come to UBC. I am certainly a lucky Asian Canadian that can call UBC my alma mater. So for our final vignette, we had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Soma Ganasan, who graciously allowed us to visit at VGH despite being very busy. As the head of psychiatry for UBC Hospital, VGH, and a few other different clinics, he's actually there right now helping save lives, so he couldn't be with us. But like all good stories, this one began over a cup of coffee, particularly with Helen Lay, and I just wanted to extend a huge thank you, because without her, she was unable, like, we would not have heard about this particular name. So thank you, Helen. And what I find so particularly compelling about this story is the timeliness of it. So when we went to go and interview Dr. Ganasan in March, when we went to his office, there was actually a plaque of a Vancouver Sun article that was talking about his efforts to assist with Syrian refugees who had just come into Canada, him being a refugee boat person himself. So coming full circle in that. And so you'll see this in the film, in our last film for you today. So I guess a couple days ago, after celebrating being an ACAM grad, last July I was informed that the research task that I would have is just to, look back into 100 years worth of UBC history, find about 5 short stories that you could possibly find, create some videos. No one's done this before, no big deal. And I can joke about it now, but at the time I had no idea where to start. Thank you, Chris. So I have an endless amount of thank yous for those who helped along the way. Like I mentioned, what I started was I contacted people like Chris Hives over at UBC Archives and the UBC Registrar's Office, and I went through the digitized UBC yearbooks from 1916, our first graduating class, and then I stopped at around 1950 because my eyes were getting tired. But what I did was I stared into this computer screen, looking at the pixelated photos of every UBC graduate composite between 1916 and 1950, looking for some semblance of Asian characteristics in the photos, and you'd be surprised. And then I noted down those names into this one giant spreadsheet. And I sent it off to Christine Lee over at Arts Alumni, and she helped track me down some of the possible kinds of contact information after I signed a confidentiality agreement. And I also have to say thank you so much to all the different community contacts, because like I said, this work, I can only do so much. The phone book can only do so much. And being able to publish in newspapers like the Philippine Inquirer or the Nikkei Voice, having those, that kind of old school method of dispersing information was so integral to this particular project. I have to say, of course, thank you to ACAM for, I'm sorry, you had to choose me, I guess, right? So I apologize, but thank you always for the ongoing support, to Denise Fong for making sure that this project stayed its course even while she was away from the office, to Tyler Mark for always being a very dependable second set of hands, to Sue, to Stephanie, and to Cynthia for making today happen, for all this wonderful food, and of course to my boss, Chris Lee, for Chris, I'm so sorry how many receipts that you had to reimburse because I spent so much money on egg tarts at Newtown, because if you know anything about being Asian and going to do community work, you never show up empty-handed. And that explains that one time that I went for dim sum with an 105-year-old woman, so it was covered too. So very exciting kind of stuff. So thank you, Chris, but also being the fearless leader, the leadership that you need to find in telling 5 stories of a history that has never been told before. That kind of leadership doesn't come from anywhere else. But lastly, once again, I cannot say thank you enough more to Al Yoshizawa, who is hiding, for editing and shooting these beautiful films. Al has a very young son at home, and he's also working on another film, All of Our Father's Relations, which we are very excited to be coming out later this year. But Al, thank you for spending every early morning and every late night on the edits. And finally, once more, please thank you please help me thanking the community for all your time, support, and dedication. This work genuinely does not exist, and we are so privileged to do this work because of your commitment, because of your trust for us to tell these stories. Whether it was a phone call, whether it was going out for dim sum, whether it's like Murray and Tosh Kitagawa, who had to, I guess they adopted me because I called them so much. Thank you so much, honestly, for all your support and wisdom. It is about time. It's about time we've had this conversation, and I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Let me just say, other than just to apologize to Dominique for putting her through whatever she went through last year, when people ask me or our staff or our faculty what ACAM, what this work is about, it's about these stories, right? It's about these extraordinary stories. And what I think is even more incredible is that we really are just scratching the surface with 5 stories. So many of you in this room already hold stories within your own lives, your own family lives, people that you know. And part of what we're doing together today and through ACAM, through other initiatives, is to create a space that other students, new generations can learn these stories as well. And the other thing when people ask what ACAM is about, it's about having students like Dominique around, right? And every student that we saw earlier today, because these are the students who spent the time to listen to elders, to community collaborators, community mentors, and they are respectfully retelling these stories so that other people, so that they will not be forgotten. So thank you to Dominique for setting just a wonderful example of what ACAM can be, and thank you as well to our special guest today for sharing your stories. Thank you. So this. So I know it's been a really long day, and we are concluding our events today. I would also like to mention that in honor of Asian Heritage Month, we are having some exhibits in the lobby of the Irving K. Barber Learning Center about Asian communities at UBC, so I invite you to check them out. And so as we look forward to UBC's next century, we're grateful to the many alumni who've gone before us. We're grateful to them for laying a path for our graduates to follow, and we're also grateful for many staff, students, and faculty who have worked so hard to make today's event possible. So actually, one more thing I want to do is I actually want to call to the stage Cynthia, Sue, and Denise. Earlier, we met Stephanie, who's graduating tomorrow, but I want to just introduce you to the other members of the ACAM team. And Sarah's going to help me, I think, with this. Okay, thank you. I will say being an administrator is very humbling because you immediately learn what you cannot do, which is in my case many, many things. And you learn that nothing is possible without people who can actually do those things. And this is the amazing team with Stephanie in the back. Which wave, Steph, in the back? That I have the privilege of working with. They get emails from me at all times during the day, including this morning, I think, with last-minute changes. They are incredibly tolerant to all these changes that we make, but also they really live the values of respecting and working with our communities. And so they teach me every day what it means to do this work. And so I just want to give some small gifts. First to Sue. Sue does most of the work with our classes and our curriculum. She does a lot of grant writing for us, but what you see in classrooms at ACAM, probably Sue did it in some way, and it's not the thing of very small. So thank you, Sue. Cynthia is the newest member of our team. It's been great to have you, especially for working on today's events. Cynthia is amazing in taking care of every single little detail, including some ones that I would never think about even attending to. It's been great having you on the team, and we hope to see you. Thank you. And finally, Denise Fong is our program manager. I'll just say nothing is possible without Denise Fong, period. That's all I'm going to say. She's program manager for ACAM, and we're just so lucky that we have her on our team. So finally, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. We're grateful for your continued support, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a very good evening, and happy 100th birthday to UBC. Thank you.